Hey everyone, my name is Andrew Rader. I will be posting this on YouTube, so I guess hi YouTube as well. I'm a first year medical student at the University of Louisville School of Medicine, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics. Initially, I was just going to do some pharmacokinetic problems, and I still will do them in this video, but I also went a little bit off the beaten path as well. I'm going to be talking a little bit about some topics that I encountered in pharmacy school that I thought maybe could be helpful to explain again for my fellow classmates. So hopefully this is helpful for you guys. If it's not, that's okay. We have some great faculty that are going to work through pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics with us in these next couple of weeks. I just wanted to get this video out there as maybe a little bit of a first exposure, so you aren't maybe surprised when you see a lot of mathematical calculations come at you all at once, especially in pharmacokinetics. PK and PD, it's a field with a lot of graphs, so I have some here, and I have a big one on the back as well of this board that I'll show in a little bit. So yeah, there's a lot to talk about, so just wanted to start by saying welcome to PK and PD. So, what actually do those terms mean? I think is a great start. So, almost everything in pharmacology just builds from these two definitions for PK and PD. It may not be too visible on the camera, but I'll be explaining it all verbally anyway. So, PK, pharmacokinetics, it is what the body does to a drug. It describes how drug concentration changes with time. Pharmacokinetics, it's all about movement, distribution, and elimination of a drug. So pharmacokinetics will include the absorption, distribution, and metabolism, and excretion, the ADME of a drug. So when you're doing PK, you're asking how fast does the drug enter the bloodstream? How high does the concentration get of that drug in the bloodstream? How long does that drug stay there in the bloodstream, and how fast is that drug removed? So how fast is it metabolized and excreted? So that's why PK is always concentration versus time. You should be able to see that. It's concentration versus time graphs, and a lot of them look like this. Anyway, so with PK, you're going to see things like the concentration of the Cmax. So Cmax would be like right here at the top of the graph. You're going to see the Cmin as well, so the minimum concentration down here. You're going to see the half-life of a drug, so how long does it take for 50% of the drug to be removed. You're going to see the clearance of a drug, so how fast the body is able to clear, or how fast the drug is cleared from the body. You see the volume distribution of the drug, so how much volume in the body does a drug have to distribute through. So for example, if it's a very hydrophilic drug, then I'm trying to remember back now, thinking if it's a very hydrophilic drug, then it's going to have a kind of a low volume of distribution because you don't have too much water in your body compared to if it was a lipophilic drug, which would be able to infiltrate into all kinds of lipid tissue in your body, and thus these lipophilic drugs are going to have way higher volumes of distribution compared to hydrophilic drugs. So again, that maybe doesn't make too much sense right now, but it will in the future. So just warning you now and introducing the topics in a safe space. So all of those words that I just said, all of them purely describe drug levels and not necessarily the effect of the drug. That wheelhouse, the effect of a drug, that is all of that is for pharmacodynamics. So pharmacodynamics is what the drug does to the body. So pharmacodynamics is about effect. It's about receptors. It's about biological response. So pharmacodynamics, you're asking the question, how strong is the drug? What is the maximum effect that the drug can produce? How much drug is needed to produce half of the effect? Do you need to do the full effect? Is half enough? And how does blocking or activating receptors change outcomes? How does it change how the drug, how the effect of the drug is? So pharmacodynamics is going to be concentration versus effect. And they have these like logarithmic graphs. So it's always in log. I think, believe so. I see a lot of log graphs of pharmacodynamics. That's all I'll say about it. So, again, concentration versus effect. Pharmacokinetics will give you concentration. Pharmacodynamics will tell you what that concentration actually means biologically. So you can think of it like in pharmacokinetics, you're loading a drug into a system, and then in pharmacodynamics, you're interpreting what that drug actually does in the system. So without pharmacokinetics, you don't know how much drug is present. Without pharmacodynamics, you don't know what that drug does. Together, pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics can form this bridge between dosing a drug and the clinical outcome of the drug. And that also has its own graph as well, which are PK/PD graphs, effect versus time graphs, which, as you can see here, so you have the effect, time, and usually sometimes the graphs will look like this. Sometimes they can be a little bit different depending on how much effect there is. This is assuming like a lot of effect at once, and it has this nice steady slope down. Next, I wanted to talk about one of the topics that confused me a little bit in pharmacy school, which was agonists, antagonists, and inhibition, and specifically the graphs for them and how they would look like for us as medical students. I don't think, hopefully I'm not going to get too into the weeds with this. I don't think we need to know too much about it right now. Eventually in the future we will. But for now, with the level that we're at, I think with what I did is simple enough. So let me flip this. All right. Anyway, I was way too excited about doing that. So agonist, antagonist, and inhibition. That is, I think of it as like a pharmacodynamic problem. Inhibition and agonism, that's like the pharmacodynamic world. So the graph that I have here, this is a graph with an agonist and then a competitive antagonist. So starting with agonists, a full agonist is something that will bind the receptor, activate the receptor, and then produce the maximal effect on that receptor. So here you can see drug concentration 0. Drug is introduced. It's concentration versus time. So, sorry, this is drug concentration versus effect. So this is a pharmacodynamic graph. So you see drug is introduced, no concentration, and then effect climbs up, 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 up. So it's binding to the receptor, it's activating the receptor is activating, it's causing an effect, and then until it reaches all the way up here, E max. That is the maximal effect. E max, effect maximum. Full agonists will have, they should have efficacy, so they'll produce an effect, and they'll have, and also tell you potency, how much drug is needed to produce an effect, especially if I didn't provide like a unit on drug concentration, but these could be like nanograms or micrograms or milligrams or grams. So that's just how potent the drug is. In that same vein, I just talked about full agonists. There's also partial agonists. So partial agonists will bind to a receptor, they'll activate it but weakly, and they'll have lower Emaxs. So I forgot to draw a partial agonist on here, but I can do a really brief one. So a agonist versus a partial agonist. So agonist is just going up. Partial agonist would do the same kind of thing. So it's going up, 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 but then it just gives out at a lower Emax. So you see this full agonist has an Emax of 100%, but this partial agonist that I just drew right now has an Emax of 70% right here. There's actually some nuance to this where when a partial agonist is alone, so there's only this 70% partial agonist, it'll just act like an agonist. But if you add this partial agonist that I just drew and you introduce it to a person that's already having this, that's already has this full agonist on board, that partial agonist, that little agonist that's not quite as effective, is going to act like an antagonist because it's going to be competing with receptor space for that full agonist, but it'll produce a weaker signal. So partial agonists overall will reduce effect of these full agonists in the presence of stronger drugs. So a little bit of rambling there, but anyway, I thought it was super interesting. So that's full agonists and partial agonists. So now what about antagonists? So antagonists, there's lots of different kinds. The graph here I wrote, this is a competitive antagonist. Originally, this was a competitive antagonist of a full agonist. So what does that mean? So antagonists will bind receptors up. They will not produce effect on those receptors, and they will their role is to block other drugs. So they're binding a receptor and they're preventing an agonist from binding to that and potentially causing an effect. These guys should not produce effect. So specific antagonists, and there's different kinds. So this one I wrote on here is competitive antagonist. So a competitive antagonist is is an antagonist that will compete with the normal agonist. So this is the normal agonist. This is the competitive antagonist. So this is the pharmacodynamic. So okay, let me start from the beginning. So this is your body. This is the effect. This is a drug's effect on the body. This full agonist here. You introduce a competitive antagonist. The competitive antagonist is coming in and it's taking away binding sites that agonist would use to create an effect. With competitive antagonists, their binding where they are going onto these receptors, that is reversible. So they can be kicked off of these binding sites. So that's important because if you increase agonists, the concentration of an agonist, if you increase this agonist, you'll overcome this blockade. So that's why they both go to the same Emax. With competitive antagonists, you have this EC50 value, which is how you measure how effective they are. So that value is pretty much at 50% effect, 50% efficacy. How much concentration do you need to achieve that? Competitive antagonists shift this to the right. They'll shift that EC50 to the right. But again, if you get enough concentration, it doesn't matter how much competitive antagonists you have on board. If you have enough concentration of this full agonist, it will kick off that competitive antagonist that's sitting on that binding site that is reversible, and you'll still have the same Emax. So another interpretation of it, much simpler interpretation, is not me rambling about a graph and how this is your body. The drug will still work, you just need more of it. Dose can overcome this type of inhibition. Just having more dose, you can overcome this. So another type of antagonist is a non-competitive antagonist. So with non-competitive antagonists, how they work is they bind somewhere else or otherwise permanently disable a receptor. So they're not a competitive antagonist that's sitting on the receptor and can be kicked off, and that receptor is still there. This is something that's coming in and either binding or permanently disabling the receptor in some way. It doesn't compete for the same site as the full agonist would when it is introduced. So the consequence of this is that it doesn't matter how much agonist you would introduce if the receptor is just not there for it to bind to. So if you have a non-competitive antagonist, you'll have a situation where it's going to look very similar. So this was the partial agonist that I drew earlier. So it's going up, it's having effect, but it just doesn't have quite as good as an effect as Emax. Graphically, the non-competitive antagonists look almost identical to this. But a non-competitive antagonist is just taking receptors out that a full agonist would bind to. So a full agonist with all of its receptors that it can bind to would have this Emax of 100. Then you introduce this competitive antagonist, and it doesn't matter how much of that full agonist that you introduce, because it's going to be capped at a certain effect, at a certain percent of effect level, because that non-competitive antagonist is knocking receptors out for it. So again, graphically, your curve is going to flatten. And another way to interpret that is that no matter how much of this agonist that you give, you will not be able to reach the same maximum effect that you would previously. So that is non-competitive antagonists. Then there's another kind of non-competitive antagonists, which is very similar to it, called irreversible antagonism. With irreversible antagonists permanently bind to a receptor, like reducing this total number of working receptors, and they're functionally very similar to non-competitive antagonists. So graphically, you're going to have this Emax decrease, and then actually recovering from this Emax decrease, you have to wait for completely new receptors to generate. You just need new receptors made, and these irreversible antagonists can take weeks to recover from, or longer, just waiting for the receptors to generate again. Another way you can think about it is that an agonist is someone walking. Okay, this just came to my head right now. Hold on. This is good. This is good. Hold on. Okay, you have a building here. This is your building. And here is your door to your building. Your building and your door to your building. We'll put a doorknob there as well. And this building is called. And you have an individual here that is your agonist. They want to get inside your building. This is your body. Okay. So if you have nothing on board, it's just the agonist. This is Mr. or Mrs. Agonist. I don't really care. It's an agonist. This is their name. First name agonist. They want to go into the body. They want to enter the building. If there's nothing on board, they'll just go straight in and open the door and walk in. A competitive antagonist is another person also going to the same door. So you have this person standing in front of the door. An agonist needs to push through them or push them out of the way to enter and cause effect in the body. So that is competitive antagonism. Agonist wants to go into the building, which is your body. competitive antagonist is standing in front of the door and blocking their way in. Okay. So a non-competitive antagonist someone just removed the door. So that's non-competitive antagonism. An irreversible antagonist is someone just blew the building up, the receptor. They didn't blow the body up, but they blew up the receptor, which would have let you go and interact with the body, and there's now no building there at all for agonist to go into. And there's no interaction that they can do. They'll have to just find a different receptor or a different building to interface with in order to have an effect on the body. All right, that is my that's my rambling about agonists, antagonists, partial agonists, and all. So I'm gonna put a little stop in the video right here. I'll probably put like a little timestamp where it's like rambling end, start and end. And now I'm actually going to talk about the pharmacokinetic calculations. This is going to be math from here on out, not me talking about theoretical stuff. Because Dr. Stressa and Dr. Hine will have much better explanations than what I have here as pharmacology PhDs. I'm going to leave this here. Still in the video though, in case somebody finds it useful for some reason. And I'm going to switch over to doing the calculations now.